Every morning is not just the start of a day, it is the start of your mind's direction. For someone who overthinks, morning is not peace, it is noise before the world even begins. Thoughts start running before the eyes are fully open. Yesterday returns, tomorrow appears, and the present moment is already lost. The moment you wake up, your mind is in one of its most vulnerable states. It has not yet built any defense. It has not yet established clarity, and it is still moving between dreams and reality. In this exact state, whatever you expose yourself to becomes the foundation of your entire mental direction for the day. When the first action of the morning is reaching for the phone, you are immediately giving control of your attention away. Before you even become fully aware of yourself, you are already reacting to the outside world. Notifications, messages, social media updates, and endless streams of information enter your mind before you have had a chance to understand your own thoughts. This creates a subtle but powerful form of mental dependency, where your awareness is no longer self-generated but externally triggered. For people who overthink, this habit becomes even more damaging because the mind is already sensitive and active. Instead of allowing natural calmness to settle, the phone introduces artificial stimulation. Each notification pulls the mind in a different direction, creating fragmentation. One moment you are thinking about a message, the next moment a news headline, and then suddenly comparing your life to someone else's highlight. This scattered attention becomes the foundation of anxiety without you even realizing it. The mind starts operating in reaction mode instead of observation mode, and once that shift happens early in the morning, it becomes extremely difficult to regain inner control throughout the rest of the day. There's also a deeper psychological effect at play. When you immediately engage with your phone, you are unconsciously telling your mind that your internal world is not important enough to be experienced first. You prioritize external input over internal presence. This weakens your ability to sit with your own thoughts without Hasnort's distraction. Over time, silence starts to feel uncomfortable, and the absence of stimulation creates restlessness. This is not because silence is harmful, but because the mind has been trained to avoid it. The early morning is the only time when your attention is naturally soft and unconditioned. This is when you have the opportunity to set the tone of your mental state. If you fill this space with noise, your entire day inherits that noise. But if you protect this space, even for a short period, you begin to notice a shift in how your mind behaves. Thoughts become slower, reactions become lighter, and emotional pressure reduces. This is not about avoiding technology completely, but about choosing when to engage with it, rather than being pulled into it unconsciously. Many people underestimate how powerful the first few minutes of waking up are. They believe that checking the phone is harmless, just a quick habit, something automatic. But habits are not neutral, they are shaping the structure of attention. Every time you reach for your phone first, you reinforce a pattern of external dependency. Your mind learns to seek stimulation immediately after waking, and this makes it harder to develop patience, stillness, and inner stability. When you resist this habit, even slightly, you begin to reclaim a part of your mental independence. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of consuming, you become aware. You give your mind a chance to settle into its natural rhythm before introducing external influence. In that short window of time, even a few minutes, something important happens. You begin to experience your own presence before the world enters your awareness. When the morning begins with stillness and awareness, you are not performing an action for the sake of routine. You are creating a foundation for how your entire inner world will function throughout the day. Stillness in the morning is not inactivity, it is controlled presence. It is the ability to remain with yourself before the world starts pulling your attention in multiple directions. For a person who overthinks, this becomes essential because the mind is usually already active, already moving through past memories, future scenarios, and imagined problems. Without grounding, the mind continues this movement unchecked and turns small thoughts into emotional weight. Awareness, Hei snorts, in this context, means observing what is happening inside without immediately reacting to it. When you wake up and simply sit still, you begin to notice the natural activity of the mind. Thoughts will appear on their own. Some will be random, some will be repetitive, and some will carry emotional residue from yesterday. The key is not to follow them. Most people get trapped because they believe every thought requires engagement, but awareness allows you to see thoughts as events, not commands. You are not inside the thought, you are the one noticing it. Stillness gives space for this separation to become clear. Without stillness, there is no gap between thought and reaction. The mind jumps instantly from idea to emotion to response. But when you introduce stillness, even for a short period, you begin to slow that chain reaction. You are not suppressing thoughts. You are simply not feeding them. This is where mental clarity begins to form. The mind, when not constantly stimulated, starts to settle naturally. Thought snorts thought like water, becoming clear when it is left undisturbed. For overthinkers, mornings often feel mentally crowded. There is an internal pressure to solve life, to plan everything, to analyze situations that have not even happened yet. But stillness interrupts this pattern. It creates a boundary between waking up and reacting to life. In that boundary, you regain control over how your attention is used. Instead of immediately being pulled into mental noise, you create a moment of observation where nothing needs to be solved. Awareness also changes your relationship with discomfort. When you sit in silence, you may initially feel restlessness. The mind might resist. It might try to convince you to move, to check something, to engage with stimulation. This resistance is normal because the mind is used to constant activity. But staying with that discomfort without escaping it strengthens mental stability. You begin to realize that discomfort is not dangerous, it is just unfamiliar stillness. Over time, this practice starts reshaping your internal baseline. The mind becomes less reactive because it is no longer being constantly pulled outward from the first moment of the day. You begin to notice that thoughts lose their urgency. They still appear, but they no longer dominate your attention. There is a growing sense of distance between you and your mental activity. That distance is where calmness exists. Stillness in the morning also allows emotional clarity to surface naturally. Without distraction, you start to see what is actually present inside you instead of what the external world is imposing. Sometimes it may be stress, sometimes anticipation, sometimes subtle fatigue. Instead of escaping these states, awareness allows you to acknowledge them without judgment. This acknowledgement reduces internal pressure because nothing is being suppressed or ignored. The more consistently you practice this, the more your mornings become less about mental chaos and more about mental observation. Troche ken snorts a troche. You are not trying to fix your thoughts, you are simply witnessing them without being controlled by them. This shift may seem small, but it fundamentally changes how you experience the rest of your day, because you are no longer starting from a reactive state, but from a grounded one. Breathing is something you do every moment without thinking. Yet, when you bring conscious attention to it, it becomes one of the most powerful tools to stabilize an overactive mind. For people who overthink, the mind is rarely quiet. It moves continuously from one thought to another, often without direction, creating mental noise that feels difficult to escape. In such a state, focusing on breathing is not about controlling life or forcing calmness, but about returning attention to something simple, natural, and always present. When you begin to observe your breath in the morning, you are shifting your awareness from mental projection to physical reality. Thoughts exist in the abstract space of imagination, memory, and anticipation, but breathing exists in the present moment. It is happening here now without needing interpretation. By anchoring attention to breath, you create a bridge between your mind and your body. This bridge interrupts the constant cycle of thinking and allows awareness to settle in something stable rather than chaotic. At first, the mind snorts may resist this focus. It may wander immediately into thoughts about the day, unfinished tasks, or emotional concerns. This is natural because the mind is conditioned to move. The goal is not to fight these thoughts, but to gently use attention to breathing each time you notice distraction. Every return is a moment of training. You are not failing when the mind drifts. You are strengthening awareness when you bring it back. Over time, this process reduces the automatic grip of overthinking. As you observe your breath, you begin to notice its rhythm. It is not forced or hurried. It expands and contracts naturally. This rhythm becomes a reminder that not everything in life requires control. The body knows how to regulate itself without constant interference. The mind, however, often forgets this and tries to manage every possibility at once. By aligning attention with breath, you begin to reflect the natural pace of the body within the activity of the mind. For someone who overthinks, anxiety often feels like acceleration. Thoughts speed up, emotions intensify, and the sense of control weakens. Conscious breathing introduces the opposite effect. It slows perception. It reduces the intensity of mental movement. Even a few minutes of focused breathing can soften the urgency that overthinking creates. This is not because the problems disappear, but because your relationship with them changes. They no longer feel immediate or overwhelming. There is also a subtle shift that happens when attention stays with breathing. You start to recognize the difference between thinking and awareness itself. Thoughts are observed rather than identified with. You are no longer fully inside the mental narrative. Instead, you become the observer of that narrative. This separation is important because overthinking thrives when there is no distance between you and your thoughts. When every thought feels personal and absolute, the mind becomes crowded. But when you observe thoughts while focusing on breath, they begin to lose their control over your emotional state. Breathing also connects you back to your physical presence. Overthinking often pulls attention away from the body and into abstract mental space. You become disconnected from physical sensations, posture, and environment. By focusing on breath, you return to embodied awareness. You start feeling the rise and fall of your chest, the air entering and leaving, the subtle sensations that ground you in reality. This grounding reduces mental fragmentation because attention is no longer scattered across imaginary scenarios. As this practice continues, the breath becomes more than just a focus point. It becomes a reference for stability. Whenever the mind becomes too active during the day, returning attention to breathing acts as a reset. It does not require effort, explanation, or external tools. It is always available. This accessibility makes it one of the most practical ways to interrupt cycles of overthinking before they escalate. When the morning begins with mental overload, the entire structure of the day becomes unstable before it even properly starts. For people who overthink, the early hours often carry a silent pressure to solve everything at once. The mind tries to organize the future, analyze the past, and predict outcomes that have not yet happened. This creates a mental environment where everything feels urgent even when nothing has actually occurred. Avoiding this early overload is not about ignoring responsibilities, but about protecting the mind from unnecessary fragmentation before it gains clarity. Mental overload usually begins with small triggers. A single thought leads to another, and without awareness the mind starts building entire scenarios. You might think about one task and suddenly you are imagining multiple outcomes, possible failures, and unrelated concerns. This chain reaction feels automatic because the mind is trained to associate thinking with problem solving. But not every thought is a problem that needs immediate attention. Many thoughts are simply mental activity without real importance. Yet the mind treats them as if they require action. In the morning, this tendency becomes stronger because the mind is still in a sensitive state. There is no clear grounding yet, no structured focus, and no physical engagement with the outside world. If you allow this unstructured mental flow to continue unchecked, it quickly turns into overload. The experience of overwhelm is not created by external reality alone, but by the accumulation of internal reactions to imagined realities. Overthinking feeds on this internal construction. Avoiding mental overload means learning to delay unnecessary thinking, not eliminate thinking itself. There is a difference between productive reflection and uncontrolled mental expansion. Productive reflection is focused and limited to what is needed in the present. Uncontrolled thinking spreads in all directions without boundaries. The morning is the most important time to set this boundary. If you allow unrestricted thinking at the start of the day, it becomes difficult to contain later, because the mind has already been activated in a scattered way. One of the key aspects of avoiding overload is recognizing urgency created by the mind. The mind often presents thoughts as urgent even when they are not. It creates a sense that everything must be figured out immediately. But urgency is often a mental illusion. Very few situations actually require instant internal resolution upon waking. By noticing this illusion, you begin to slow down your response to thoughts instead of reacting instantly to them. When you reduce mental input in the early morning, something important begins to happen. The mind starts organizing itself naturally without forced effort. Thoughts still appear, but they do not pile up as quickly because they are not being constantly expanded. Instead of building long chains of thinking, you allow thoughts to remain simple and temporary. This prevents the mental system from becoming overloaded with unnecessary information. Overthinking thrives on expansion. Small idea becomes a complex scenario, and a simple concern becomes a full narrative. To avoid overload, you must interrupt this expansion early. This does not require suppression, only awareness. When you notice a thought is growing beyond its actual importance, you do not continue feeding it. You observe it and allow it to pass without building further structure around it. Another important factor is resisting the habit of mentally rehearsing the entire day in the morning. Many people unconsciously simulate conversations, tasks, and outcomes before anything has actually happened. This creates a false sense of preparation while actually draining mental energy. The mind feels busy, but nothing real has been accomplished. This early simulation leads to fatigue before the day even begins. By limiting Snort's early thinking, you preserve mental clarity for situations that actually require attention. Instead of starting the day already mentally exhausted, you begin with available awareness. This awareness allows you to respond to real situations Snorts more effectively rather than reacting to imagined ones. It creates space between stimulus and response, which is essential for reducing overthinking patterns. Avoiding mental overload is not about emptying the mind completely. It is about preventing unnecessary accumulation of thoughts snorts that do not serve the present moment. When the mind is not overloaded in the morning, it functions with greater simplicity. Decisions feel lighter, attention snorts feels clearer, and emotional reactivity reduces naturally without force. A structured morning is not about rigid control or forcing every moment into strict rules. It is about creating a stable framework that prevents the mind from falling into chaos. For people who overthink, the absence of structure in the morning becomes a doorway for mental disorder. When there is no clear pattern to follow, the mind fills that space with random thoughts, unnecessary analysis, and emotional noise. A simple structure gives the mind direction before it starts creating its own confusion. When you wake up without structure, the first few minutes often decide the tone of your entire day. If those minutes are filled with distraction, uncertainty, or mental wandering, the rest of the day tends to reflect that instability. But when you follow a clear and simple sequence of actions, the mind receives a signal that there is order. This order is not external pressure, it is internal grounding. It tells your mind that there is a path to follow instead of endless possibilities to overanalyze. Structure does not mean complexity. In fact, for overthinkers, simplicity is more powerful than complexity. Snorts or too many steps or complicated routines can become another source of mental pressure. The goal is not to overwhelm the mind with tasks, but to gently guide it through a predictable flow. When actions are predictable, the mind relaxes because it does not need to constantly decide what to do next. Decision fatigue is one of the hidden causes of overthinking, and structure reduces this burden significantly. A structured morning also limits the space for random mental entry points. Without structure, the mind jumps from one thought to another without interruption. It might start with a concern, shift to a memory, then jump to a future worry, and continue cycling without pause. But when you follow a routine, each action becomes a point of focus that interrupts this cycle. Even simple activities like washing your face, drinking water, or organizing your space act as anchors that bring attention back to the present. For overthinkers, structure also reduces emotional instability. When there is no direction, emotions tend to influence decisions more strongly. A small feeling of anxiety can lead to excessive thinking, and a minor concern can grow into a mental burden. But when your morning follows a consistent pattern, emotions have less control over your actions because you are guided by process rather than impulse. You are not deciding everything in the moment. You are following a path already set. Another important aspect of structure is that it creates momentum. Once the mind completes a few simple actions in order, it begins to shift from passive thinking to active engagement. This transition is crucial because overthinking thrives in inactivity. When the body is not engaged in meaningful action, the mind fills the gap with unnecessary mental activity. Structure reduces this gap by keeping you gently involved in physical and practical tasks. A structured morning also builds trust within yourself. Every time you follow your routine, even when the mind resists, you strengthen internal discipline. This discipline is not forceful, it is consistent. Over time, your mind begins to trust that you will not abandon structure for random thoughts. This trust reduces internal conflict because there is less negotiation between what you should do and what your mind wants to distract you with. Without structure, mornings often feel like drifting. You wake up, but there is no direction, no sequence, and no sense of beginning with intention. This drifting state allows overthinking to take control because the mind is searching for something to attach itself to. Structure removes that uncertainty by giving the mind predefined steps. Even if the steps are small, they provide orientation. A structured morning is also a form of mental protection. It prevents the early hours from being consumed by unnecessary mental expansion. Instead of starting the day in reaction mode, you begin in guided mode. This reduces the likelihood of getting lost in mental loops later in the day because your mind has already been trained to follow a sequence rather than wander freely. Present moment awareness is one of the most powerful yet misunderstood practices for people who overthink. It is not about forcing the mind to become empty, and it is not about trying to control every thought. It is about learning to return your attention to what is actually happening right now instead of living inside mental projections of the past or future. Overthinking exists snorts a trot because attention is constantly leaving the present moment and attaching itself to imagined scenarios, unresolved memories, and emotional interpretations that are not part of immediate reality. When you bring awareness to the present moment, you begin to notice how much of your mental activity is not connected to what is physically happening. The body is always in the present, but the mind often travels elsewhere. It goes to yesterday's mistakes, tomorrow's uncertainties, or situations that may never even occur. This creates a gap between experience and reality. The more the mind stays in that gap, the more intense overthinking becomes. Present moment awareness closes this gap by continuously bringing attention back to what is directly in front of you. In the morning, this practice is especially important because the mind is highly suggestible after waking. Without direction, it quickly falls into habitual thinking patterns. But when you consciously practice awareness of the present moment, even in small actions, you begin to break that automatic cycle. Something as simple as feeling the weight of your body, snorts, noticing the environment around you, or paying attention to physical movement becomes a way to anchor yourself in reality instead of mental projection. Overthinking often creates the illusion that thinking more will lead to better control over life. But in reality, excessive thinking weakens your ability to experience what is actually happening. You become so absorbed in analyzing possibilities that you lose connection with the present situation itself. Present moment awareness reverses this pattern. It does not eliminate thinking, but it reduces unnecessary mental layering on top of experience. You begin to see things as they are, not as the mind interprets them. When you practice staying present, you start noticing the difference between direct experience and mental commentary. Direct experience is simple. It is what you see, hear, feel, and sense right now. Mental commentary is the ongoing narration the mind adds on top of that experience. For overthinkers, this commentary is usually constant and often negative or speculative. Present awareness teaches you to recognize when you are inside the commentary rather than the actual moment. Another important shift happens when you stay present consistently. The urgency created by overthinking starts to weaken. Many thoughts feel urgent only because they are imagined in the future or tied to emotional memory. But in the present moment, most of that urgency dissolves because there is nothing immediate requiring reaction. You begin to see that the mind often exaggerates importance when it is not grounded in reality. Practicing present awareness does not require special conditions. It can be applied to ordinary actions. Walking, eating, cleaning, or simply sitting can all opportunities to stay present. The key is not the activity itself, but the quality of attention you bring to it. When attention is fully engaged in what you are doing, the space for overthinking naturally reduces because the mind is occupied with real experience instead of abstract thought loops. Over time, this practice strengthens mental clarity. You become less reactive to thoughts because you are more connected to what is actually happening. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer fully pull you away from the present. There is a growing sense of stability where attention can return to the moment without struggle. This stability becomes the foundation for reducing overthinking at its root, because the mind is no longer constantly escaping into imagined time, but learning to remain with what is real and immediate. Overthinking loses its power, not through force, but through awareness and simple daily discipline. When the morning is protected from immediate distractions, the mind is no longer pushed into chaos before the day even begins. When stillness is practiced, the mind learns to settle instead of immediately reacting. When attention is brought to breathing, the constant speed of thoughts begins to slow down. When mental overload is avoided, unnecessary thoughts stop multiplying without control. When structure is added to the morning, the mind stops drifting and starts following a stable direction. And when present moment awareness is practiced, the mind finally returns from imagined time back into real experience. All of these are not separate ideas, but connected parts of the same shift. They all point toward one truth. Overthinking is not something that needs to be fought, she snorts, with more thinking, but something that dissolves when attention is trained to stay grounded, simple, and present. The mind becomes clearer not by adding more information, but by removing unnecessary mental noise and learning to observe instead of react. A calm morning is not a technique for temporary peace. It is a training of attention that shapes how the entire day is experienced. When the first moments of the day are controlled with awareness, instead of distraction, the rest of the day naturally follows that pattern. The mind becomes less scattered, less reactive, and less trapped in internal stories that do not reflect reality. In the end, the purpose is not to eliminate thought, but to stop being controlled by it. When awareness becomes stronger than automatic thinking, overthinking slowly loses its dominance and life is experienced with more clarity, simplicity, and presence.